So yeah, anyway, we got picked up again. In the mix, though, I mean, now we got a third season of Newlywed Game. Okay, another 175 shows, but we're not tired of it because we all, at this point, we had honed it down to we're still all the same people, all working together, except we're doing Dating Game and Newlywed Game, and we also had picked up a show called Camouflage, which is a much more traditional game show. Which, again, I don't want to waste the whole 9 hours here on Chuck Barris Productions, but it was simply remember Highlights magazine when you were a kid, and you'd have to find
finding an object in a picture.
Right. Camouflage was just that, and we would remove layers until they ultimately figured out what the object was. Yeah, and it was a once a weeker, but somewhere in there we had to produce that. So likewise, Newlywed Game is picked up for a third season, and at that time, excuse me, Chuck had come up with a show called 3's a Crowd. Okay, and this sounded like a good idea. It was a husband, a wife, and the husband's secretary. A little bit sexist. Only
it's the 70s.
Yeah, 70s. I don't think there was one show where we had a wife and a secretary, which again, today we would definitely do it. But yeah, back then. So husband, wife, and it was the premise presumably was who knows the husband better, the secretary or the wife. And the show worked best, obviously, when the secretary not only knew the husband better, but we found out that there was something going on between the husband and the secretary, and there was hair pulling. Now, again, the pool of contestants, we pulled a lot of former Newlywed Game couples because you could do more than one show. We got as many people as we could, and the show just got the worst publicity you've ever seen because we were basically breaking up marriages on the air. That's the way it came across to people, and the ratings plummeted.
Now, as someone who worked on the program, do you feel that was true? Let me actually say this. There's a quote in a book that I can show you later where Jim Peck says that I think it was 12 divorces or something like that.
Good for Jim. I would not be surprised. Sure. Yeah. And Jim, by the way, underrated host. Jim did a very nice job on that show. Jim is very, what they call white bread. I don't know what that even means anymore, but white bread host. I think he was Canadian, like most game show hosts. We did another show together, another relationship show, but he never achieved the status that he deserved. He was very good. And he did a great job on that show because it was a tough show, like Newlywed Game. You had to manipulate and know when to go in and when to stay out. And
bad press
bad press started affecting all of the shows, and one by one, nobody wanted to air 3's a Crowd. Then they didn't want to air Newlywed Game. They didn't want to air Dating Game. On the other end of the spectrum, because Chuck Barris was being so successful, the Gong Show portion of the show, we're doing the $1.98 beauty show, which was a parody satire of beauty shows. Again, Larry Goddard was the model. Okay, Larry had a beard, and he wore a dress, and he ran out, looked silly, and the girls on the beauty show were not attractive, and
in a traditional sense.
In a traditional sense, they were not pretty.
Sorry.
Okay. It's all right. Anymore. No, I mean, we had a few pretty girls in there. Again, I didn't work on the show, but I saw it. But also Chuck sold the Chuck Barris Rah Rah show. We overdid it. I mean, we had too many shows on the air, and all of the shows kind of started to suffer because we have the same staff. I mean, the Newlywed Game staff now is doing Newlywed Game, Dating Game, Camouflage, 3's a Crowd. And we did a pilot of How's Your Mother-in-Law with Pat McCormick, who was the head writer for the Johnny Carson show. And we're all simultaneously still working 7 days. Chuck's doing all these other shows, but Three's a Crowd was our downfall. We started to get bad press. People then likewise, Dating Game was just too, it was 1980. The 70s were over, and people were getting kind of tired of the, sex of the Newlywed Game, Dating Game. It was kind of getting to be old hat. And all of a sudden, we had no shows on the air. And Chuck was, to say the least, disappointed, but not depressed. Chuck didn't have that in him. So all of a sudden, we were all out of work. I'm probably jumping over a lot of stuff, but I got to move on, or we'll never get through this interview. And in 1980, so I'm out of work, and my girlfriend and I were doing some mountain climbing. Make a long story short, I fell. I had a craniotomy, and I was in the hospital for months. When it came out, my face was all black and blue, and I was, but I was okay. I had seizures, but I had to get back to work. I had to get the rent, and nobody would hire me. I mean, again, this purple-looking guy, and out of nowhere, even though he had no shows on the air, I get a call from Chuck Barris saying he's going to do another pilot, and it's called $1 a Second. I said, okay, it's $1 a second, and it's with Bob Eubanks. Great. I said, so I just finished working with Bob. And the only reason Chuck hired me was because he knew nobody else was hiring me because of the way I looked. And Willie Stein, who was just coming off a failed show, it was called the David Letterman Show. It was on in the morning, and it just tanked. It was not a good show. Although Dave, I think, went on to better things.
I've heard that.
And so anyway, I had never done a stunt show before. Bob had never done a stunt show before, but he had done many shows like it. I mean, meaning all sorts of a diversity of shows, but not that precise of a stunt show. So we didn't know what we were doing. It's on YouTube. Somebody can watch it. I'm not going to talk about it other than I didn't know what I was doing, but I did my best, and the show did not sell. So once again, was out of work. And that was it. I mean, at that point, Chuck basically closed up offices. He had bought a lighting company that went on, and Chuck had married. It's funny. I mean, in Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, Drew Barrymore plays his wife, and the way they set up the marriage between, or how they met, was not really true. I mean, Robin, who he calls Red, red hair. Robin worked in accounting. Beautiful girl. I grew up with her in Englewood Cliffs. She lived in Englewood a few blocks away, so I knew her anyway. Beautiful girl, but she was in accounting. And I told you, Chuck never came down, but all of a sudden, Chuck kept walking past our offices, and he would go to accounting all the time. And then he started dating Robin, and they got married very quickly. And it was a successful marriage for quite some time. Anyway, that's about it for Chuck Barris, other than any questions that you might have.
One thing I did want to ask, because then we'll talk about Merrill Heater in a little bit, but you came to LA wanting to be a writer, and now you're working primarily on game shows, relationship shows. How did you feel about that? Were you happy that you were in this type of work? Were you thinking this is going to be a stepping stone to something else that's not game show related? What were your plans, if any, at that time?
Yes, I still, again, because I knew I could write short stories. And again, I was pretty bad at writing Newlywed Game questions. Dating game questions I could write. They were easier for me. But still, that whole question format, part of it was I didn't want to do it. I knew I could write, and I felt, even though I was thrilled, I was a producer and stuff, not beneath me, that would be the wrong word, but just writing a question as opposed to writing a character study and a story that starts and there's a middle and an end that you're hopefully pleased with and not expecting, that made me happy. Whereas I got no excitement out of writing a good dating game question or Newlywed Game question. Even the silly ones, like the, what's the roundest room in your house or apartment? although we got a laugh and it worked great on the show, I personally, I knew I wasn't going to get an Emmy for best writing. So yeah, I knew, but I also knew that I wasn't going to get anywhere writing fiction by sticking with game shows, but that's what I was known for. The problem was in 1980, after $1 a second, Writers Guild went on strike and AFTRA went on strike. And if you're old enough to remember this, there was no season that year because the strikes lasted so long that it was impossible to produce shows. So they decided in 1980, 81, it was just reruns. So there were no jobs to be had. There were literally no jobs to be had. Meantime, Dad's still waiting back in Jersey for me to go back to chemistry. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my battery. Go back to chemistry land and build scratch offs. So I had to move out of my apartment because I couldn't afford it. And I moved, and again, there were no jobs to be had. I'd had an agent, Aaron Cohen, over at the William Morris agency, but around 80, 81, AIDS, which had not even existed prior to that, just everybody, it just affected everybody. There was no cure for, it wasn't HIV, AIDS. It was just, everybody knew there was some kind of infection that was going around. It finally got a name, AIDS, and people started dying left and right. And it was the most horrible part of my life because I lost so many friends, people, everybody not everybody, but people I'd worked with, friends, just agents, everybody. It was just a horrible year. There were no jobs, friends were dying, there was no cure for AIDS, and it was just horrible. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that. It was too depressing and
not a good, difficult.
I remember all the wonderful people that I worked with who died. There were people my age then. People in their 20s dying for no reason. Other than there's just crazy infection that came from somewhere. It was just horrible. Anyway, okay, we're done with that.